Hello, everybody. Good evening. Guys, we've got about 12, 13 minutes before the news. And as is my custom, I'm over here at Simoson Building. I'm about to leave to go home. The great thing about leaving my office at this time is that there's not so much traffic. We still have traffic, but it's not as bad. I never leave the office at 5 o'clock, ever. Because, when you leave at 5, you get stuck in traffic. And what do? You sit in traffic for 2 hours. So I'm going to need about 13 minutes of your time. Let's just chime in very quickly because I know this topic is still fresh. It's still on our lips. It's still burning within our hearts. And I think that when it's doing that, it's important. You and I have an obligation. We have a duty to dissect the issue. So let's jump into it. Many of you know yesterday, the head of state, the President Hakainde Hichilema, held a press briefing. And many of you were there. If you were not there, you were watching it on television. And after he gave his verbal dissertation at State House, the time came for journalists to begin to ask the president questions. Now, it's important to understand the backstory and the history of journalists asking the president or a sitting head of state questions. It's a very tricky thing, especially given where we came from, given the background of our history. In the past, especially in the recent past, namely the time of the NPF, the Notorious Patriotic Front, it was very rare for journalists to ask bold, pressing, pensive questions. Oftentimes, the questions were either orchestrated or journalists were too afraid to ask the real questions, and so they would consequently dance around the issue. And whenever that would happen, you wouldn't get to the crux of the issue. And as you know, journalism is about getting information. That's all it's about. It's never about interrogation. It's never about embarrassment, or at least it shouldn't be about any of those things. Journalism is about getting accurate information from a credible source. And so yesterday, after the president spoke, he opened the floor for questions. And one of the questions, there were many questions, but one of the questions that was asked of the president was a young lady stepped up to the podium. She stepped up to the microphone, and she was from Muvi TV. And she asked a question. She said, Mr. President, you speak a lot of rhetoric. Now, before I begin to correct the misuse of this word, rhetoric, in this context, let's first of all define rhetoric. What is rhetoric? In very simple terms, rhetoric is the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing. Rhetoric. Okay, so when she said you speak a lot of rhetoric, she was being redundant. I know what she meant, and I know she knows what she meant. I know the Sorry about that. This is what she was supposed to say. She was supposed to say, Mr. President, you use a lot of rhetoric. And then she would go into her question. Now, here's the thing, guys. Uh, Rhetoric in this context, the way she used it when she said you speak a lot of rhetoric, it's like saying, repeat it again. You don't say that. You can say you use a lot of rhetoric. That's what she meant to say. And then the president went into this description and this response where he said, well, it's not just rhetoric. Of course, we use rhetoric, we use effective speak to communicate our message. So it's not just about speaking, it's about doing. And then he ran through a long list of things that him and his administration have accomplished. Now, what I find interesting is that if this question had this question been asked during the NPF, the Notorious Patriotic Front, do you have any idea what the cadres would have done to that girl? The PF cadres would have come. You chikashana iwe. Ule sebanya wakateka. Ule sebanya. Twara kudiringa. That's the type of environment that was predominant at State House when the NPF were in power. Everything was about threatening and a very tense environment, and you have to be extra careful with how you ask. It should never be about that. Of course, we're not advocating. We're not saying, and you know that this is not what we're saying. We're not saying that journalists should speak disparagingly of the head of state. We're not saying that journalists should be blatantly disrespectful to the president. Of course, that's not what we're saying. What we are saying is that journalists should ask well-balanced, clear-cut questions that benefit the public. Like I said, journalism is about getting information that you wouldn't otherwise know. That's the reason you ask them. Now, I remember in particular, guys, tell me if you remember this. Tell me in the comments if you remember this. I forget the question, but I do remember the response that former President Lungu gave. Some of you will remember this. He was asked a question, and his response was, "That is a malicious question. That is malicious." Do you guys remember that? Tell me in the comments if you remember that. Who remembers that? Who remembers that response? I forget the question, but I do remember the way that the former president responded. Guys, it's important. This is a really good time for journalists to sharpen their skills. Whenever the president is having a press briefing, a press conference, go in there, sharpen and hone your skills, because this is the best time. Right now is the best time to showcase those skills. Why? Because now we're living and operating in an environment where you can ask the president pensive, deep digging questions. Why? Because you want the information to disseminate to the public. Go watch the news. 4 more minutes. And that's what I wanted to tell you. Thanks for watching. God bless. Bye.